Your college football game day has come early.
Goes down the field for Sicky, goes up high. He's got get away from the top speed, and the ball is free. Woo! What a hit! You got barbecue back there.
From underdog triumphs to powerhouse showdowns, we've got your winning playbook covered. It's BetQLU with Chris Mack, RJ Choppy, and John Martin. Presented by BetMGM. The sports book born in Vegas. Download the app today. Please gamble responsibly.
And here we are, all of a sudden, just about at the halfway point of the regular season in college football. Welcome in live coast to coast on the BetQL network every Friday night and Saturday morning. You got my guy RJ Choppy. You got my guy John Martin. I'm Chris Mack, just sitting here in the middle, breathing in the intelligence that I'm surrounded by, getting ready to preview what is a massive week in college football. A couple of huge SEC matchups. Bama in Knoxville to take on the Vols. You got the Dogs of Georgia headed out to Austin to visit the Longhorns. We'll have a third game to preview as well that could take one of those conferences that I don't know how much sense it's making or not, at least at the top, the ACC. We'll talk Miami, Louisville. We'll talk, we talked Big 12 last week, and that's just such chaos. Quite literally, that conference is in a blender every single week. But we will look at the Big 10 a little bit later, as there's plenty to look ahead to this week and the next few weeks. But we begin by looking back at last weekend, week 6 here on the college football slate on BetQLU. Don't forget, you can download us in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts by simply searching for BetQLU, including right there inside your free Odyssey app, AUDACY. And you can always watch the show as well on the Odyssey Sports YouTube channel. But, well, let's start actually in the Big Ten. Officially a Big Ten game, but the first time these two teams had ever met as Big Ten opponents. Before we get to officiating loopholes and quarterback slides and all of that, let's talk Penn State USC real quick before we get to last week's Big Daddy, which was Oregon, Ohio State. Number 3 Nittany Lions come all the way back to beat the Trojans in overtime. Tyler Warren has a tight end game for the ages, Choppy. 17 catches, 224 yards, and a touchdown. Again, we'll get into the Big Ten in greater detail a little bit later, but this would seem to pretty much cement, unless there's an utter collapse for Penn State down the stretch, cement a playoff spot for them, would it not?
I mean, I would think so. You got to look at the schedules and you got to see where teams go. And obviously there's injuries that get thrown in there. But, when you're undefeated at this point, we're halfway through the season. You really need to lose 2 games. And even still with 2 losses, I think most Big Ten or SEC teams with 2 losses are going to have a real good shot of getting in. That's just the way it's going to shake out. So, yeah, barring injury and barring something crazy happening, in which, look, we've already had one crazy Saturday in the sport. We might have another one. There's usually 2, especially this year. There's so many more big games because it feels like there's 4 or 5 big games every week. Short of that, I think that if you're undefeated at this point and you're in one of those 2 conferences, you got to put yourself in the 85% category to make the playoff.
Yeah, that dynamic about how many losses are survivable in one of the 2 mega conferences is a question we can get to in a couple minutes, John. But it feels like Penn State is surviving that one, coming back to beat USC, is in a better spot. And it feels like Oregon is in a really good spot now as well after battling back and forth with Ohio State all night at home. They win 32-31. A couple things to talk about here. The 12-man penalty that Dan Lanning and the Ducks purposely took, that loophole has been closed by the NCAA and some changes made to the officiating and the rules in the last week. Also, Will Howard basically losing track of how much time was on the clock, sliding with zeros on the clock. We said last week that it felt like a matchup of quarterbacks in that game, and there you go. The better quarterback won that game, Dylan Gabriel over Will Howard. But what's interesting here is that despite the result, Ohio State still has better odds than Oregon to win the national championship at plus 450 to the Ducks plus 550. What do you make of the dynamic at the top of the Big Ten now, John, after that Oregon win? Are they national title worthy? We'll start there.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ohio State was considered by many, not I don't actually think by anybody on this show, but by many to be the best team in college football. So for Oregon to hold on there at home and get that dub, it accomplishes, two things. One is you're obviously in the mix for the top of the Big Ten, and two, I think Dylan Gabriel's Heisman candidacy has just gotten on a rocket ship. We're sort of looking for that guy to emerge, because we all know that Ashton Genty is not going to get it. We can keep pretending, we can keep playing this charade. He ain't getting it. He plays in the Mountain West, folks. Like, he's not getting that award. I don't care if he goes for 400 yards every single week. It's just not going to happen. It hasn't happened since '63. So yeah, I mean, I've always been skeptical. Ryan Day is definitely a guy that any chance I get, I always look to fade him. He's kind of gotten lucky in a few spots. Like, I think about that Notre Dame game was it last year where he definitely should have lost it. Obviously, I think he deserved to lose that game over the weekend. So, when you start talking about best teams in the country, like that's what for me prevents me from going all in with Ohio State. Like, I love Dan Lanning. He's finding loopholes. He's being aggressive. He's pushing the envelope. He's getting rules changed out here, right? Like, Ryan Day is the guy that plays by him, and I think that's kind of the difference for me with Ohio State. So look, they're so talented, guys. We know this, that they're gonna be in the mix, but I don't really buy them, and I have made no such bet on them, as a national champion of any sort for all those reasons.
I don't want no rule follower either, man. You got a rule for that. I want no part of that. Give me a guy. You ain't cheating. You ain't trying. Cheat to win.
That's right.
Cheat to win. That's right. Give me that. Give me some of that. Give me some of that good Eddie Guerrero. Cheat to win. All right. That's what I'm looking for.
That's right. We lie. We cheat. We steal.
Yeah.
Latino heat, baby.
That's right,
yes,
man. Save the rule followers for the NFL. This is college football.
Right.
This is the Wild West. Give me the guy who does. He goes to the line. I don't want the guy who doesn't even know where the line is.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I made the comparison between the quarterbacks, but like that's the difference there in the game is the coaching, really. In all honesty, yes, 100%. Gabriel performed better than Howard did in that game in what is a big contest in the biggest moments. But we can blame Will Howard for the slide with zeros on the clock. We can also blame his head coach for not reminding him, hey, Will, we got to get one more playoff, right? And you can credit Dan Lanning, conversely, for having the wherewithal to say, no, hey, sneak out on the field here. We need a 12th on the field. Well, so credit to Dylan Gabriel for being the better quarterback, but certainly, I think, to your point, John, a whole hell of a lot more credit to Dan Lanning for being
because real quick on that point, I just want to make this point real quick before we move on. You look around the country at coaches who have lost great quarterbacks, and they reload and they try to come back for a second straight year, and it don't quite look the same. I'm gonna single out Florida State. I mean, Florida State was amazing last year with Jordan Travis. They go out in the portal, they get DJU. That's one of the most anemic passing offenses in the Power Four. Dan Lanning has now done this over two straight quarterbacks, in Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel. And maybe the margin isn't quite as dominant, but the record looks the same to me. So, I think Dan Lanning is every single week cementing himself more and more as, top class in college football coaching.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how coaching plays out in these two giant SEC matchups over the weekend, which we'll get to preview in just a couple of minutes. Let's talk about the updated playoff odds. We mentioned Penn State nearly a shoo-in now, unless they should collapse down the stretch. They come in at minus 700. That will put them sixth on the board if you go by odds to make the college football playoff, because your top four would be Texas, Oregon, 1, 2, both minus 2,000. Miami third at minus 250 to make the college football playoff. Best odds in the Big 12 right now, Iowa State, and they look like the best of a very flawed bunch in the Big 12, but they're still plus money to make the playoff at plus 135. Then you get to Ohio State, minus 1,000 to make the playoff. That would put them just ahead of Penn State. Georgia, minus 500. Bama, minus 400. Clemson, minus 160. They certainly have turned things around, even within last week, which I thought was a little bit of a microcosm, that game against Wake to their season. Kind of slow to wake up and really get moving, but then stepped on the gas and took over. Notre Dame, minus 135 to make the playoff. Their schedule going to give them an opportunity to make some waves down the stretch, which I don't think we expected with the service academies being so good this year. Tennessee, plus 105. Boise, even money. And then you get to the next 5 out. And this kind of gives you an idea, I think, guys, of what the complexion of the borderline teams are right now in the college football playoff race. Texas A&M, plus 115. LSU, plus 150. Ole Miss, plus 165. Your 3 sort of borderline SEC teams, it feels like. Indiana has come out of nowhere to make a name for themselves. Plus 185 in Kurt Cignetti's first year there with the Hoosiers. And SMU, still kind of a dark horse in what is a weird ACC that we'll get to, plus 230. So I'll ask you to take those next 5 out, Choppy, the next 5 teams out. Do you like any of those, especially at their current odds, to make it into the college football playoff? A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, Indiana, or SMU?
Oh, I like Indiana. I like the odds on Indiana. You know, you're getting basically 2 to 1. You know, SMU, the problem with SMU is they still have a lot of group of 5 players. That's just the nature of it. They're trying to build that program into a Power 4 program. So they still got some, group of 5 players out there. I really think Indiana at 2 to 1 is essentially 2 to 1. That's a pretty good number, right? That's pretty decent. I think A&M has got themselves a great chance because they have Texas at home. And they have Texas at home at a time of the year where Texas, because of the cushion, if Texas beats Georgia, they're in, right? They don't have to worry. And we might get to a point where you get towards the end of the year, that Thanksgiving weekend game, where they're playing A&M on the road. A&M would have everything to play for. A&M beats Texas at home. They're in. They will put themselves in a really great position, even if they have another loss, with 2 losses to get in, with a win over Texas, if Texas were to beat Georgia. So A&M puts themselves in a really good spot.
You know, it's a wild concept. I know we mentioned last week, John, the idea of Army and Navy possibly meeting in the American Conference Championship game and then having to play the Army-Navy game a week later.
2 straight weeks.
There's a world, if you go with Choppy's theory here about A&M staying in this conversation in the SEC, where those 2 play on Thanksgiving weekend, A&M and the Longhorns, and then turn around and meet each other again a week later in the SEC title game.
Yeah, no, you're right. A&M is a team that I think we kind of checked out on because of their quarterback play, in week 2 or week 3. But the reality is, that Notre Dame loss looks better and better every single week. And I think we probably haven't quite caught up to, the real perception of what Texas A&M is. I think they're legit. I think they're for real. And look, that Missouri beatdown was no fluke. There's just no 2 ways around it. So I think, it's just funny how our opinions can change over the course of, 6 weeks, how we go from A&M looking like one of the big disappointments in college football to now they kind of look like maybe a sneakier team to make some noise deep into this season.
And not just that, but the SEC, Choppy, as a whole, going from, just a bunch of behemoths at the top who are all unquestionably going to the playoff. Georgia, Bama, Tennessee, Texas. And now it's like, well, it's Texas. And these other teams, they might be able to sneak in with a second loss, but I wouldn't consider it a gimme. If you're Bama and Tennessee, and we'll get to that game in a couple minutes, that might be a loser goes home kind of game. If you're Georgia, it would be a loss in Austin, but it would be a second conference loss. You'd still be able to get into the playoff, but you'd have zero margin for error down the stretch.
Well, yeah, you would have zero margin for error. I don't know they're going to keep a 2-loss SEC team out. Someone might get out. Someone might get left out if you got 6 teams with 1 loss or 2 losses. But if Alabama beats Tennessee and Tennessee beats Georgia, that's going to be, I mean, 2 losses would be in. If Tennessee wins and Alabama wins out, Alabama would still have a win over Georgia. And then whatever happens, they might be able to go to the conference. Who knows, right? There's ways to figure it out. Georgia, if they lose to Texas, they still would get a couple of other games down the stretch. I still think that Georgia's fine. You get into some of the other teams that might find it more difficult, and it depends on how many there are. LSU is still out there. Right? LSU is still out there. They got a chance. A&M's up. They got a chance. You got 6 teams with 2 losses, then someone's going to get left out. There's no margin for error.
And the transitive property of this team beat that team who beat this team who beat that team gets a whole lot more muddy depending on what may or may not happen this weekend. And we'll talk about those games next. Georgia, Texas, Bama, Tennessee. And I mentioned the ACC being a little sloppy at the top. We'll talk Miami, Louisville next here on BetQLU.
You've been listening to BetQLU, presented by BetMGM. If you missed any of the show, listen back anytime on the new and improved Odyssey app.
Are you ready, sir? Start your engines. Let's go.
Astros money line versus the Marlins. Johnny Cueto, no thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. How does this affect me personally?
Which is absolutely bonkers to me.
If you do the middle school math, is 117 yards per game that you gotta post each and every weekend.
I knew it.
Who has the upper hand? Do we think it's going to be the offenses, or do we think it's going to be the defenses?
How about Saturday's game? Let's just throw a random game out here.
I don't want to put faith in NC State. There's a chance we'll lose outright. Who knows? Jinx is definitely not paying attention right now. He's just vibing to the music.
Are you ready for the most interactive sports gambling show? Introducing BetQL's Send It In with PJ Glasser. We want to hear from you. Send It In is about your picks, your trends, and your fades. Share your thoughts, predictions, and your daily best bets with the Send It In community. Set your reminders, mark your calendars, and get ready to send it in on weekday afternoons at 1 Eastern on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. On your home for wagertainment, the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Go for the betting cycle on BetQL with Cody Decker.
Cody Decker, former professional baseball player, turned professional smartass on the radio.
Sports handicapper Rob Brown.
When Penix Jr. plays USC, he's getting 400 yards.
Cycling all the top plays.
And Cody Decker, I think Florida can cover today.
And one outrageous show parlay.
1, 2, 3. Oh!
Let the chaos begin. It's Bet for the Cycle on the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Some would say that maybe he'll be chasing Super Bowl MVP. Really makes me angry that Knicks fans can't have anything. We've been bad for. I get it. Now it's okay. 100% of attention on 9 million games tonight. It's a playoff game. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends, and it ends with absolute disaster. But I'll tell you, that's fun. But the most fun thing about betting on sports for me is this. Hey, there's no tomorrow. And now, come on, pick it in.
Are you ready, sir? Start your engines. Let's go.
Astros money line versus the Marlins. Johnny Cueto, no thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. How does this affect me personally?
Which is absolutely bonkers to me.
If you do the middle school math, is 117 yards per game that you gotta post each and every weekend.
I knew it.
Who has the upper hand? Do we think it's going to be the offenses, or do we think it's going to be the defenses?
How about Saturday's game? Let's just throw a random game out here.
I don't want to put faith in NC State. There's a chance we'll lose outright. Who knows? Jinx is definitely not paying attention right now. He's just vibing to the music.
Are you ready for the most interactive sports gambling show? Introducing BetQL's Send It In with PJ Glasser. We want to hear from you. Send It In is about your picks, your trends, and your fades. Share your thoughts, predictions, and your best daily best bets with the Send It In community. Set your reminders, mark your calendars, and get ready to send it in on weekday afternoons at 1 Eastern on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. On your home for wagertainment, the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Some would say that maybe he'll be chasing Super Bowl MVP. Really makes me angry that, like, Knicks fans can't have anything. We've been bad for... I get it. Now it's, okay, 100% of attention on 9 million games tonight. It's a playoff game. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. And it ends with absolute disaster. But I'll tell you, that's fun. But the most fun thing about betting on sports for me is this. Like, hey, there's no tomorrow. And now, come on, put Pickett in.
Let's get back to BetQLU, presented by BetMGM.
Alongside RJ Choppy and John Martin, I'm Chris Mack. This is BetQLU, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Every Friday night, Saturday morning, we got you covered. We're getting you ready for all the weekend's action, and Week 7 is here. We're just about halfway through the college football regular season, and there are two massive games in the SEC to be played that we will get to. We will get to Bama, Tennessee, and Georgia, Texas in just a minute. But, John, let's start with a noon kickoff in the ACC, a conference that is really hard to get a handle on, right? Like Miami, okay, they look like they should be the best team in the conference. Then you got they're 6th in the country. You got Clemson, 10th in the country. Other than the ugly Week 1 loss to Georgia, they seem to have found their footing. Then you got a couple teams also ranked. Number 20, Pitt, is the only other undefeated team in the conference. And number 21, SMU, first year in the conference, 2-0 in the conference, 5-1 overall. It's a weird conference, very weird at the top. Feels like Clemson and Miami have more legitimate playoff opportunities than anybody else. But here's Miami coming off a bye, a couple of shaky wins, if you can have shaky wins, having to come all the way back against Cal out of Berkeley. Getting the last play victory at home against Virginia Tech. But this would give them a 7-0 start for the first time in 7 years. They lead the all-time series for what it's worth. 11 out of 16 games they've won against Louisville. But this one is in the Ville, on the road. Miami laying 4.5. Cam Ward still putting up numbers, although not being as responsible with the football maybe as they would like him to be at times. And Louisville, they've shown they can score some points, or at least move the ball as well. Both defenses, decent pass rushes, but not the best secondary. I don't know where I come in on this one, to be honest. 4.5 is a tricky number on this game, I think. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I hate laying points with Miami this year. I did it against Virginia Tech. And the problem with Miami, and granted, 5 is, it opened 4.5, so with the other 5, so it's pretty much where it opened. But the problem with Miami is that they know for a fact that they're more talented than the other team, and they kind of play like that, and they don't really look to jump out and jump on anybody. They tend to kind of play around with their food, like they did against Virginia Tech, like they did against Cal, because they know at the end of the day they can probably score at the end of a game and hit a game-winning field goal or whatever the case may be if they need it. Or in the case of Cal, a game-winning touchdown. So that's why I would tend to lean Louisville +5 here, even though it's a dead number, right, for the most part. I just kind of – Miami can win the game, but I think anything over a field goal, laying this on the road with Cam Ward and just that nonchalant attitude that they play with, it's just not a team I want to lay points with. So they could win the game, but I would be on Louisville +5.
I am absolutely with you. Miami is begging to lose one of these games. And they do play to the level of their competition. At least they have the ability to. But John's right. I mean, they're just more talented than most teams out there, and they're more talented than Louisville. But, are they going to be able to do to them what, they did in escaping Virginia Tech and escaping Cal? They should have a loss. Now, the Cal game, I told y'all about the circadian sleep rhythm of this being like a 10-15 game. Now, we don't have to worry about that when you're playing Louisville.
That's right.
Central time zone will be fine. But, or maybe it's Eastern. I don't know. I'm not a map guy. I am a map guy, but whatever. I like Louisville here. If I was going to bet this, I was thinking about the over too, because a lot of these Miami games go above the number. Now, they've raised the number a little bit. The last couple of games they played have been in the 50s, but I think the over is a decent play, but I would take Louisville.
Yeah, that's what's interesting on the total on this one. Opened at 59.5, shot up almost immediately to 61.5, and has come back down to 59.5. I think I like the over in this one as well, guys. That might be the one play I do feel good about because, like I said, decent pass rushes for both defenses, but the secondaries clearly have their weaknesses. And if both quarterbacks decide to do some good things, with explosive plays being the thing that both offenses can do well, I think this could very quickly get over. We could go to the fourth quarter with the winner in doubt, but the total not in doubt. Let's go to Saturday afternoon, 3:30 Eastern. Bama at Tennessee. Number 7 Tide visiting the number 11 Volunteers in Knoxville. It is a 3-point game, the 107th meeting all time between these two. The third Saturday in October is reserved for Bama, Tennessee. And I said it earlier, Choppy, this feels like it could be a loser goes home kind of game because both teams have a loss already. It's in conference, and they're going to fall into this weird second tier, maybe even third tier pile in the SEC, the loser will, with Ole Miss, Mizzou, maybe LSU as well. So there is a lot riding on this one. People say the regular season doesn't mean as much. This might be a regular season game that means a ton in Knoxville on Saturday afternoon.
I think you're right. Now, both teams will have a chance to get a big road win. Alabama has to go to LSU still, and Tennessee has to go to Georgia. But I think the loser of this game is going to be an underdog in that situation either way. So, it probably is a winner-go-home game. And these two teams are mirror images of each other right now. They can't. The last 2 weeks, Alabama has not looked great. They lost to Vandy, and they escaped South Carolina. And then Tennessee loses to Arkansas and escapes Florida. And the offense for Bama at least has been, pretty good. The Tennessee offense has been very bad. And that's the ills of a freshman quarterback. That's just the reality of it. When you start a freshman quarterback and you go on the road in the SEC, you're playing SEC teams, they're going to spook you. And he has absolutely been spooked. So, I have the under in this one. I think it's at 57. I saw it at 57, 56.5. That's a lot of points for one team who's got a really, really good defense, and neither team has been able to show that they can dominate another one. So I like the under in this one. I don't have a great feel of this one. I'm going to State Fair on Saturday morning. I'm gonna go get some fried okra and fried grilled cheese and
deep fried Oreos
and fried everything. Cotton candy bacon on a stick, and then I'm going to come home and I'm going to watch this game because I have no idea what's going to happen.
The one interesting thing, aside from how long you'll be in a food coma on Saturday afternoon, Choppy, is both of these teams are very explosive on offense, and both defenses have typically been able, they've had their third down issues. Certainly Bama has the last couple of weeks. But, Iamaleava, Nico is not playing like a quarterback who's here to exploit Alabama with big plays on third down. Bama comes in, despite Ryan Williams cooling off just a bit the last couple of weeks, with the more experienced quarterback and Jalen Milroe looking like a team that may be able to take advantage of Tennessee in those spots and finally break through against the defense, John. This is the thing, too. Tennessee's defense has not given up a ton of big plays.
They haven't. I mean, I'll say this, though. That's 2 straight weeks, man, where Tennessee, they did lose 2 weeks ago. And the idea that Billy Napier didn't go for 2 to try to hand him a second straight, he'd have been fired Saturday night if I was the Florida administration as a 15-point underdog. So Tennessee got let off the hook last week, right? Mertz leaves the game, and Lagway comes in, and they've been kind of going with that 2-quarterback format for the whole year. But, he hits that big pass play for the touchdown, and they don't go for 2. I thought that was just crazy work. But Tennessee just looks off to me. Like they look like this sort of well-oiled machine the first 3 weeks of the season. Then they kind of start playing people, and Nico's timing isn't there, and the rhythm to the offense isn't there. And Alabama got away with one last week too. Make no mistake about it. And they obviously lost to Vanderbilt, but I still think Bama -3 is the side. I just think Milroe's experience, in these kinds of games is going to loom pretty large. And I do think they just look like a more dependable outfit right now than Tennessee, because Alabama, they beat Georgia. Who's Tennessee beating? That's kind of where.
And I don't even know if dependable is the word. I get what you're saying, but it's more that I look at the 2 quarterbacks, like Choppy mentioned. You got a freshman on one side who started to look like a freshman since he got into conference play. You got Milroe on the other side, who's been in these spots before on the road in the SEC. And then I look at the history, and I know history doesn't always feed into these things, but Bama's 9-2, against the spread in their last 11 games in Knoxville. I do think, like you said, John, Bama -3 is the side in this one. This is going to be enormous Saturday night in Austin. Number 1 Texas Longhorns hosting the number 5 Georgia Bulldogs. 4.5 right now. That doesn't surprise me. That's the number I had it pegged at after watching the way things went down last week. Texas, the only remaining undefeated team in the SEC, 6-0, their best start since 2009. And oh, by the way, once they get through this one, the schedule is soft. SOFFFFFFF, soft. Because they've got the softest remaining strength of schedule in the conference, including this game. I know Georgia is Georgia. I know it's Kirby, but they're trying to avoid this second loss, and it feels like – you talk about Tennessee being off, John. It feels like something is off with Georgia. I know they've gone out and scored 72 points in the last 2 weeks, but I go back and look at the 6 quarters previous to that. The first half in Tuscaloosa, the 4 quarters against Kentucky, when they scored 2 touchdowns combined. And there's still something missing with Carson Beck, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know what. I mean, I know they lost some to the NFL. I get that. I mean, that's going to be life for Georgia every single year. But I outside of that blistering second half, like when the game was sort of still in the balance, and you're getting Alabama's best effort. He's looked bad, and it's been a clunky operation all year long. So I don't know if it's a run game problem. I don't know if it's the receivers aren't as dynamic. I'm not really sure what explains the drop off. But I mean, you're talking about last year. He was as good as anybody, and he just doesn't look like the same guy to me. Now you get to a point where this number goes too far. It's Kirby Smart. It's Georgia. Like, they haven't been an underdog for 2 years, let alone at this magnitude. But yeah, I mean, that's why you're seeing guys, the money come in on Texas, is because they're watching the same thing. They're watching the struggles of Carson Beck and that Georgia offense. It just doesn't look nearly as explosive as we're accustomed.
Yeah, this thing, Choppy, led off way back when it opened at like 1.5. It's out all the way to 4.5, 5 in some spots. We could argue about whether that's a negligible difference, 4.5 and 5, just based on the numbers. But it feels like John said, the money is coming in on Texas, and there's very little belief in Georgia being able, I think, to go into Austin and be able to score enough points.
I want to warn y'all about something. You do not want Texas to win this game. You do not know insufferable until Texas. I'm just telling you guys. Okay, they are acting down here like they are saving the SEC. I am just telling America, and however this far this internet thing travels, you do not want Texas to win this game. You will never hear the end of it. And they're going to, because they're a better team. They got a better quarterback. Now, Georgia might have more first-round picks. Whatever. They're a home team. They're playing at home. And I'm just telling you, though, I'm gonna lay it out here. You do not want Texas to win this game. Just take that information I'm giving you and just put it in your pocket. Do whatever you want with it. You don't want them to win.
Well, I got a bad feeling for your sake, Choppy. They're going to. And then when you get through the rest of the schedule, there's no reason to suspect until they get to that challenge against A&M in the final week that we alluded to earlier. There's they certainly won't be dogs at all the rest of the year. They'll be favored in every single game, and rightly so. Quinn Ewers had the perfect opportunity last week to sort of tune up, coming back after missing a few weeks against Oklahoma. Didn't put up big numbers, but looked pretty good. Texas as a whole gave us, I think, pretty much exactly what we expected against Oklahoma. They, for very good reason, are the number one team in the country, and their fans will get to be insufferable as long as Sark handles business against Georgia on Saturday night. And then down the stretch, like I said, they should be expected to handle business as well. So we talked a ton of SEC. We touched on the ACC. We know the Big 12 is a bleep storm every single week with a new team seemingly taking the lead. What about the Big 10 now that Oregon and Ohio State have met and Penn State survived their trip out west to L.A.? We'll hone in on that conference, plus maybe the dark horse that we like to make the playoff out of the Big 10, and get you our best bets as well. All on the way next, right here on BetQLU, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas.
You've been listening to BetQLU, presented by BetMGM. If you missed any of the show, listen back anytime on the new and improved Odyssey app.
Are you ready, sir? Start your engines. Let's go.
Astros money line versus the Marlins. Johnny Cueto, no thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. How does this affect me personally?
Which is absolutely bonkers to me.
If you do the middle school math, is 117 yards per game that you gotta post each and every weekend.
I knew it.
Who has the upper hand? Do we think it's going to be the offenses, or do we think it's going to be the defenses?
How about Saturday's game? Let's just throw a random game out here.
Like, I don't want to put faith in NC State. There's a chance we'll lose outright. Who knows? Jinx is definitely not paying attention right now. He's just vibing to the music.
Are you ready for the most interactive sports gambling show? Introducing BetQL's Send It In with PJ Glasser. We want to hear from you. Send It In is about your picks, your trends, and your fades. Share your thoughts, predictions, and your best daily best bets with the Send It In community. Set your reminders, mark your calendars, and get ready to send it in on weekday afternoons at 1 Eastern on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. On your home for wagertainment, the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Go for the betting cycle on BetQL with Cody Decker.
Cody Decker, former professional baseball player, turned professional smartass on the radio.
Sports handicapper Rob Brown.
When Penix Jr. plays USC, he's getting 400 yards.
Cycling all the top plays.
And Cody Decker, I think Florida can cover today.
And one outrageous show parlay.
1, 2, 3. Oh!
Let the chaos begin. It's Bet for the Cycle on the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Some would say that maybe he'll be chasing Super Bowl MVP really makes me angry that, like, Knicks fans can't have anything. We've been bad for... I get it. Now it's, okay, 100% of attention on 9 million games tonight. It's a playoff game! We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends, and it ends with absolute disaster. But I'll tell you, that's fun, but the most fun thing about betting on sports for me is this. Like, hey, there's no tomorrow. And now, come on, pick it in.
Are you ready, sir? Start your engines. Let's go.
Astros money line versus the Marlins. Johnny Cueto, no thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. How does this affect me personally?
Which is absolutely bonkers to me.
If you do the middle school math, is 117 yards per game that you gotta post each and every weekend.
I knew it.
Who has the upper hand? Do we think it's going to be the offenses, or do we think it's going to be the defenses?
How about Saturday's game? Let's just throw a random game out here.
Like, I don't want to put faith in NC State. There's a chance we'll lose
13.
outright. Who knows? Jinx is definitely not paying attention right now. He's just vibing to the music.
Are you ready for the most interactive sports gambling show? Introducing BetQL's Send It In with PJ Glasser. We want to hear from you. Send It In is about your picks, your trends, and your fades. Share your thoughts, predictions, and your best daily best bets with the Send It In community. Set your reminders, mark your calendars, and get ready to send it in on weekday afternoons at 1 Eastern on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. On your home for wagertainment, the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Some would say that maybe he'll be chasing Super Bowl MVP. Really makes me angry that, like, Knicks fans can't have anything. We've been bad for... I get it. Now it's, okay, 100% of attention on 9 million games tonight. It's a playoff game! We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends, and it ends with absolute disaster. But I'll tell you, that's fun, but the most fun thing about betting on sports for me is this. Like, hey, there's no tomorrow. And now, come on, pick it in.
Let's get back to BetQLU, presented by BetMGM.
Live coast to coast on the BetQL network with you every Friday night and Saturday morning, getting you ready for that weekend's action. And it is week 8 of the college football slate. Yep, just about halfway through the regular season, half of it in the rearview mirror anyway, looking ahead to the rest of it. We'll talk Big Ten in just a moment, get you our best bets as well for this weekend. Alongside John Martin and RJ Choppy, I'm Chris Mack. You can watch on the Odyssey Sports YouTube channel. And, of course, you can always download the show in podcast form whenever you'd like to by simply searching for BetQLU wherever you get your podcasts. Presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. We ran through those 2 massive SEC games. Talked a little ACC as well with the Hurricanes visiting Louisville. Like I said, the Big 12 is just a crapshoot every single week. So who knows what'll happen there. But let's talk Big Ten, because we had 2 massive games in the Big Ten last weekend. We had Penn State come all the way back to beat USC in LA. We talked about that game, the big Tyler Warren game. And we had Oregon and Ohio State. Updated odds to win the Big Ten now. The Ducks are the favorites, John, plus 125. Buckeyes at plus 150. Penn State at plus 350. And Indiana, a team that we brought up when we were talking about borderline playoff teams, Curt Cignetti's first year there in Bloomington, and he's got the Hoosiers playing really well. 15-1 to win the Big Ten. They're going to host Nebraska on Saturday, so maybe a little bit of a proving ground there, but a big spread on that game. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Ohio State has the easiest remaining strength of schedule among those 4 teams in the Big Ten, but Indiana's not far behind. So let's take Michigan, I guess, out of the equation right now because they're kind of back there in the rearview mirror as well, alongside Illinois, the aforementioned Cornhuskers. Iowa's still somewhat in the mix, I guess, depending on how much teams may slip down the stretch. But let's talk about the big ones. Which 2 teams do we think end up meeting in the Big Ten championship game, John?
Right now, I would say Oregon for sure. And then, just based on the way that the season has played out so far, I just like Penn State. I'm not sure exactly what the road would look like, but I just like Penn State more than I like Ohio State. If I have to pick, I think Aller has come so far, in his development. Obviously, going on the road to USC, they didn't cover, but we'll forgive them. They played a hell of a game coming from behind, and James Franklin, drawing basically everything he's got up. So I just think Penn State's in a better position, and obviously it's priced the way it's priced for a reason. They're not perfect, but man, they're finding ways to win, as ugly as they may be. And I just trust their coaching staff and believe in their coaching staff more than I do Ohio State's.
I think it's Penn State as well. Penn State gets Ohio State at home, so that's a good thing for them. Their schedule is very, very manageable the rest of the way. I think Penn State's the team that would join Oregon. I'm looking at Oregon's schedule. I don't know that I really see another loss or a loss at all on it until they get to the Big Ten championship game. And Penn State gets Ohio State at home. So I think those are the 2 teams that I think are on a collision course. And I'm sorry to say that to you because I know I just put the jinx on you.
You did. And I said this to another Penn State alum that I work with the other day. I said, the perfect irony of this year would be James Franklin finally getting the undefeated season he needed to make a 4-team playoff in the year the playoff expands to 12 teams. That is the perfect irony for Penn State fans. But I have to agree with you guys, and I don't just say it as the Penn State guy. I say it based on what I've seen through the first half of the regular season. They do. They look better than Ohio State right now, in my opinion. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they have shown an ability to throw everything at you. John alluded to this. Andy Kotelnicki, the OC who they brought in from Kansas, completely in his bag on that first drive. They only ended up coming away from it with a field goal in that first drive against USC. But you saw Tyler Warren, the guy who ended up with 17 catches on the day, line up everywhere. He lined up under center. He lined up in shotgun and wildcat. He lined up in line as an extra offensive lineman, as a wide receiver in the slot, as a true tight end. And he's become a bit of a Swiss Army knife for them and a weapon that USC, whose defense had looked pretty good early in the year with D'Anton Lynn, coincidentally enough, former Penn Stater, now running their defense, looking better. But they ended up, especially in the second half, doing exactly what they needed to do to get to that point where they now look like one of possibly the 2 best teams in the Big Ten. So let's go then down to the next tier, guys, and let's talk Indiana, who we mentioned, plus 240 to make the playoff right now. I'll ask you, Choppy, if we play that old game of GTFO or oh yeah, Indiana to make the playoff, GTFO or oh yeah, I could see that, especially at plus 240.
Oh, yeah, I could absolutely see that one. I mean, they're a good team. They're undefeated. They've got – I mean, they haven't really beaten a great team yet. But I love their head coach, man. When he said, I win, Google me, that's all I needed to hear. That's all I needed to hear. So we play that in the intro to my college football segment every single day. Then we do a college football segment on my radio show. I absolutely love it. So – yeah, I think Indiana's a solid play to make the playoff.
John, who else are you looking at in the Big Ten? If it's not Indiana, do any of those other teams that I mentioned earlier have a chance? Illinois, 15-1. Nebraska and Iowa, both 18-1. USC, I think, is out of the discussion now, way back at 24-1. Michigan as well. Wisconsin's going to get Penn State in a couple weeks. Maybe they're able to lift their profile with an upset win there. At home, though, at Camp Randall against Penn State. It's hard to see. Like, the three at the top seem cemented in, I want to say. And then it's really hard to see a fourth team if it's not Indiana.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, I kind of would like to say Iowa, but, man, that 35-7 beatdown kind of just is hard to put out of your mind. But I do like how they seem to have woken up and rolled over finally and found a semblance of an offense after all these years. I mean, you know what you're going to get from them defensively. I mean, they just put up 40 on Washington last week as 2.5-point favorites. So I kind of like Iowa, and obviously you look at their schedule. I mean, my God, Northwestern at home, Wisconsin at home, UCLA, Maryland, they close Nebraska at home. They could win all of those games. In fact, they probably will.
In that fourth spot from the Big Ten to make the playoff. Let's go around, get everybody our best bets before we wrap up here on BetQLU. Next week, we'll probably take a spin around the ACC as we've taken a look at a different conference every week here in the middle of the season, kind of doing a soft reset on each conference at the midway point or close to the midway point of the regular season. So Big 12 last week, Big 10 this week, ACC next week, especially after the Miami-Louisville game this week that could shake things up a little bit more. But Choppy, let's start with you. You hit a big parlay last week, right? Come on, what do you got for us?
You know what? This team just dominates other teams at home. I think it's the altitude. Give me BYU minus the 9, sometimes 9.5 against Oklahoma State. That's what I'm looking at this week. Love BYU at home.
BYU at home. They're one of those teams that is the reason the Big 12 is.
So, we'll see. I mean, Indiana is definitely, they have burst onto the scene, and I'm with RJ. I mean, that coach is really easy to root for. But Iowa does kind of have a path with their, Michigan State. I didn't mention Michigan State. They kind of do have a path with their their schedule's set up to maybe emerge as that fourth team.
Yeah, it's Signetti's hard to root against the way he's come in and changed things up in Bloomington, and it's working right now. Anyway, it's working. They get past Nebraska this weekend. It feels like it would be worth keeping an eye on down the stretch, and certainly worth, if you really believe in what they're doing there, you get plus 240 right now on them to make the playoff. If the SEC should end up taking each other out, Reservoir Dog style, and everybody's left there to bleed out, and it's just Texas at the top, and you're looking for teams from the Big Ten, Indiana could be one. It's such a jumbled mess right now. It's because the way BYU is played at home. And every team, really. I mean, you look at a team like West Virginia still somehow in the conversation of the Big 12 because, well, the way everybody plays at home in the Big 12 keeps them in that conversation. John, what do you got for a best bet for this Week 8 in college football?
We're going to go to RJ's neck of the woods. It's being played in my neck of the woods. But we're going to go with North Texas plus, we'll say, 11.5. Here's the deal. Memphis has really not been tested at all this year, save for the one game that they lost. That was to Navy with Blake Horvath. In every other game, they played the pathetic South Florida backup, the pathetic Troy backup, North Alabama, who was pathetic, and the Florida State quarterback, who was pathetic. So they've really run hot with quarterback and offensive attacks in their 6 games this year, and they're 5-1. But I think it's a little smoke and mirrors. I mean, Chandler Morris is going to come in here as, I believe, tied for the nation's lead in touchdowns, and I'm just wondering, like, why on earth is Memphis deserving of 2+ scores here? I just don't think they are. I think this North Texas team is obviously going to be able to match them pretty much score for score. So I'll gladly take the plus 11.5 2 scores here in my pocket.
I feel like we need an American Conference check-in with American Conference champion John Martin.
We do every league except the American. It's unbelievable.
Are you okay with the service academies rolling the roost for a year? You good with that?
Yeah, I love it. I love the way those two teams play. It's an honor and a privilege to be represented by those men. And it's just I think that Navy's fun, man. Navy's not your grandfather's Navy, okay? I mean, they're a blast to watch. If you haven't watched Navy yet, you have to. They are different than what people are probably used to remembering with them.
I don't know, man. My grandfather's Navy had Roger Staubach. I don't know. That's a good example.
Your dad's Navy. Your dad's Navy. That's fair. Your dad's Navy.
I watched some of Army UAB last week because I had a bet on it. And first of all, Army's dominant when they want to be. Second of all, how Trent Dilfer still has a job with that whole UAB disaster is just, it's abysmal. I don't know what the hell they're doing down there, but it's bad. It's real bad. All right, my best bet of the week. I talked them up enough during tonight's show. I'm going to go with the Hoosiers at home. You can get it at 6.5. Take Indiana laying the 6.5 before, and in case it gets pushed to 7, take the 6.5 now. Indiana at home against Nebraska. Kurt Cignetti is weaving magic there in Bloomington. So let's go with that. We'll be back next weekend to talk about the fallout of those two massive SEC games. Like I said, we'll take a special look at the ACC as well and get you ready for the Week 9 slate. For John Martin, for RJ Choppy, I'm Chris Mack. For producer Zach Krull, this has been BetQLU, presented by BetMGM.
You've been listening to BetQLU, presented by BetMGM. If you missed any of the show, listen back anytime on the new and improved Odyssey app.
Are you ready, sir? Start your engines. Let's go.
Astros money line versus the Marlins. Johnny Cueto, no thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. How does this affect me personally?
Which is absolutely bonkers to me.
If you do the middle school math, is 117 yards per game that you gotta post each and every weekend.
I knew it.
Who has the upper hand? Do we think it's going to be the offenses, or do we think it's going to be the defenses?
How about Saturday's game? Let's just throw a random game out here.
Like, I don't want to put faith in NC State. There's a chance we'll lose outright. Who knows? Jinx is definitely not paying attention right now. He's just vibing to the music.
Are you ready for the most interactive sports gambling show? Introducing BetQL's Send It In with PJ Glasser. We want to hear from you. Send It In is about your picks, your trends, and your fades. Share your thoughts, predictions, and your best daily best bets with the Send It In community. Set your reminders, mark your calendars, and get ready to send it in on weekday afternoons at 1 Eastern on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. On your home for wagertainment, the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Go for the betting cycle on BetQL with Cody Decker.
Cody Decker, former professional baseball player, turned professional smartass on the radio.
Sports handicapper Rob Brown.
When Penix Jr. plays USC, he's getting 400 yards.
Cycling all the top plays.
And Cody Decker, I think Florida can cover today.
And one outrageous show parlay.
1, 2, 3. Oh!
Let the chaos begin. It's Bet for the Cycle on the BetQL Network, presented by BetMGM.
Some would say that maybe he'll be chasing Super Bowl MVP. Really makes me angry that, like, Knicks fans can't have anything. We've been bad for... I get it. Now it's, okay, 100% of attention on 9 million games tonight. It's a playoff game. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. And it ends with absolute disaster. But I'll tell you, that's fun. But the most fun thing about betting on sports for me is this. Like, hey, there's no tomorrow. And now, come on, put pig in